I am Sarah Connors, a proud 83-year-old grandmother. For the last 18 years I've lived a life I thought was perfect. I raised my son, had a happy marriage and brought up my beloved grandson Jake, whom I've always referred to as my Prince Charming. My life has been a beautiful tapestry of joy and love. But everything changed the day the letter came. I remember it clearly. It was a Tuesday morning and the air smelled like fresh rain. I had just finished my coffee when I heard the knock at the door. It was an official-looking envelope, its contents sealed tightly. As I opened it, I saw the words that shook my soul to the core. DNA test results. Your biological connection is under question. I froze. What? The letter didn't make sense at first. I thought maybe it was a mistake. I mean, surely they had sent the wrong letter to the wrong person, right? But no, as I read further, it became clear. The test wasn't a mistake. They weren't talking about me. It was about my grandson. My heart dropped. What do you mean? Jake's DNA doesn't match mine? I had raised him since he was born. I had been with him every day of his life. He had always been my baby. We were inseparable. The thought that something might have been wrong, something I never even suspected, was impossible to fathom. For 18 years I had believed he was mine. But now I was being told that he might not even be my biological grandson. This can't be true. I sank into the nearest chair, clutching the envelope like it was my only lifeline, trying to make sense of it all. What kind of mistake was this? How could this be possible? I had given birth to my son and then he had given me Jake. There had to be a mix-up. Maybe some lab error. Maybe Jake was switched at birth in the hospital, but that couldn't be true, could it? Suddenly, the image of the hospital came flooding back. The sterile, clean halls, the hustle and bustle, the joyful smiles, the first time I saw Jake in his little crib. But there was something else, something I couldn't put my finger on. The sudden realization hit me. The nurses had been rushed that day. The hospital had been chaotic. How was I so sure that my grandson was truly mine? And that's when the panic set in. If my grandson wasn't really mine, then who was he? How had this happened? How could I have lived 18 years not knowing the truth? I had to know. I couldn't live with this uncertainty. But as I looked at the letter again, my thoughts were interrupted by the sudden ringing of my phone. It was my son Matt. "Mom, we need to talk," he said urgently. There was something in his voice, something strange. My heart skipped a beat. "About what?" I managed to ask, trying to sound calm but failing. I could hear the shakiness in my own voice. "I'll explain everything when I get home. Just be ready, okay?" I sat there, stunned. What did he mean? And why was he so cryptic? Did he know something I didn't? Was the truth going to hurt even more than I'd imagined? The questions swirled in my mind like a storm. But no matter what, I had to find the answers. As I waited for Matt to arrive, I thought back to the day Jake was born. The joy, the happiness. How could it be? What if my entire life had been a lie? Suddenly, the door creaked open and there was Matt, looking grave. He had that look on his face, the one he gets when he's about to drop a bombshell. "Mom, sit down. We need to talk," he said, his voice filled with tension. I could see the struggle on his face. I could feel my heart racing. My mind was screaming at me to prepare for the worst. And that's when he said it. "I don't know how to say this, but the DNA test results, they're real. Jake isn't your grandson. He's someone else's." My world stopped. My mind couldn't process it. My own flesh and blood, my Prince Charming, wasn't even related to me? How? Why? What did this mean for me? For him? Tears welled up in my eyes. This couldn't be happening. But it was. The lie I had been living for 18 years had just come crashing down. I could hardly breathe as my body shook with disbelief. What had I missed? How had I not known? I couldn't even look at Matt as I wiped my eyes, feeling more alone than I had ever felt in my life. The next words Matt spoke were heavy with an unspoken truth that had been hanging in the air for so long. "Mom, we think Jake was switched at birth." I swallowed hard, trying to gather the strength to say something, anything, but nothing came. It was too much to take in. Too much for my 83-year-old heart to bear. As the shock began to settle in, all I could think of was one thing. Who is my grandson? I couldn't wait to find out, but I also didn't know if I could handle the truth. The room felt suffocating as Matt's words echoed in my head. Jake was switched at birth? The concept was too absurd to process at first, yet I couldn't ignore the reality that was unfolding before me. I looked at Matt, trying to make sense of what he had just said, but all I could feel was an overwhelming mix of confusion, betrayal, and heartache. Matt sat down next to me, his hands trembling. Mom, I didn't want to tell you this, but the DNA test results, they were part of something we had to uncover. I didn't think it was real either at first. But the truth is, Jake's biological mother, she's someone else. They mixed up the babies at the hospital. I could barely breathe as the weight of his words hit me. How could something so unimaginable happen? How could I have not noticed? I thought back to Jake's first steps, his first words, all the moments I cherished with him. Could it all have been a lie? Was it even possible that my Prince Charming, the child I had nurtured with so much love, wasn't my own? I shook my head in disbelief, clutching the edge of the chair. But he's mine, Matt. He's always been mine. I raised him. He's my son's son. He's my family. Matt's eyes were filled with guilt, and he reached out to hold my hand. I know, Mom. I know. But we have to face the truth. We can't go on living in the dark. You need to know who your real grandson is. Who is he? I whispered, my voice trembling. Who's the real mother? Matt didn't immediately answer, as if he was unsure of how much more to say. He stood up and walked toward the window, staring out into the quiet yard. We don't know her yet. But we're going to find out. The silence between us was deafening. I could hear the ticking of the clock on the wall, but the weight of everything else hung in the air like a storm ready to break. How had I never questioned the hospital? How had I trusted everyone so blindly? Suddenly I stood up, feeling the ground beneath me shift. I needed to know. I couldn't live with this uncertainty. Where is Jake? I asked, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. He's upstairs, Matt replied, his voice quiet. He doesn't know yet. I didn't want to tell him until we had all the facts. I walked slowly toward the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't how I'd imagined telling my grandson the truth, the boy who had always looked up to me as his rock, his protector. What would he think when I told him that his entire life had been built on a lie? Would he hate me for not knowing sooner? Or would he feel betrayed just as I did? I reached the top of the stairs and knocked lightly on Jake's door. Jake. I called softly. There was no answer, so I gently pushed the door open. He was sitting on his bed, staring out of the window, his hands clasped together. Jake's dark hair fell across his forehead, and his face, though youthful, held a maturity beyond his years. It was strange to look at him now and wonder if he was truly mine. Grandma, what's wrong? Jake asked, turning toward me with concern in his eyes. He could sense something was off. I took a deep breath and sat beside him, trying to find the right words. Jake, I need to talk to you about something very important. His brow furrowed. What is it? Is everything okay? I struggled to find the strength to say what needed to be said. The air in the room felt thick, like a weight pressing on my chest. Jake, honey, the truth is you might not be my biological grandson. There's been a mistake. You were switched at birth. His eyes widened in shock, his mouth opening slightly as if searching for the right response but finding none. What do you mean, Grandma? That's not funny. I wish it were a joke, sweetheart, I said softly, my voice shaking with emotion. But it's not. The hospital, there was a mix-up. They switched the babies when you were born. But I'm not your biological grandmother. The room fell silent, the only sound the gentle hum of the house. Jake stared at me, his face unreadable. I couldn't tell if he was angry, hurt, or simply trying to process what I had just said. He shook his head slowly. Are you telling me you're not really my grandma? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The hurt in his tone was so raw, so honest. It made my heart ache. I wanted to take it all back. I wanted to tell him that it wasn't true, that everything was a mistake. But I couldn't. The truth was out there and it had to be faced no matter how hard it was. I don't know what to say, I whispered, my eyes brimming with tears. But you are my grandson. You've always been my grandson. Nothing can change how I feel about you. Jake stood up abruptly, pacing around the room, his hands running through his hair. So what now? I'm just supposed to accept this? You're not my real grandma? None of this. None of my life was real. The hurt in his voice stung deeper than I could have imagined. I reached out for him, wanting to comfort him, but I couldn't find the words. I love you, Jake, I said, my voice breaking. You are my family. You will always be my family. But Jake didn't respond. He walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, feeling more helpless than I ever had before. The house was eerily quiet after Jake left the room. I stood there, motionless, unable to do anything but stare at the spot where he had been. My heart ached, torn between the love I felt for him and the guilt that now clung to me like a second skin. I knew I had to fix this. I had to make things right somehow. But where did I even begin? I wandered back downstairs, my mind racing with 1,000 thoughts. I couldn't focus. Everything felt so heavy, so fragile. I wanted to run after Jake, hold him, tell him everything would be okay. But I knew deep down that this was not something that could be fixed in a moment. The damage had already been done and now we had to deal with the consequences. Matt was sitting in the living room waiting for me. His eyes were filled with concern, but I could see the strain in his face as well. He had always been my rock, but now even he seemed unsure of what to say or do next. "Mom, how is he?" Matt asked, his voice low. I sank into the couch beside him, letting out a long, shaky breath. "He left. I don't know where he went. He doesn't want to talk to me." Matt nodded, his hand gripping mine tightly. "He's hurt, Mom. We all are. This is a lot to process, especially for him. But it's not just the mix-up," I whispered, my voice breaking. "It's everything. It's the fact that I wasn't there for him when he needed me the most. He trusted me. He thought I was his family." Matt gave me a reassuring squeeze. "You've always been there for him. But now we all need to come together and face this. He'll come around, Mom. He's just confused." I nodded, but deep down I wasn't so sure. How could I expect Jake to accept this so easily? To accept that the woman he had called his grandmother for 18 years wasn't even his biological family? How could I ever make him believe that I was still the same person who loved him, who had raised him, who had been there for him every single day of his life? I looked out the window trying to clear my mind. But the images from the past few days kept replaying in my mind. The DNA test results, the confusion, the hurt in Jake's eyes when he heard the truth. I could still hear his voice in my head, asking me if I wasn't really his grandma. My heart clenched in my chest as tears started to well up again. Was I even capable of fixing this? "Mom, I know you're upset, but we have to move forward. We have to find out who his real family is," Matt said gently, bringing me back to the present. "I know," I replied softly. "But I don't know if I'm ready to face whatever's out there. I don't know if I can stand the thought of losing him." Matt's eyes softened with empathy. "You won't lose him. He may need time, but he's your family, Mom. Nothing can take that away." I wanted to believe him. But right now the world felt as if it was slipping out of my grasp. It wasn't just Jake that was slipping away. It was everything I had worked so hard to build. All those years of love and memories seemed to be crumbling before my eyes. The hours passed and I found myself lost in my thoughts. Matt had gone to bed, but I couldn't sleep. The silence in the house was unbearable. The questions were endless. Who is the real mother? How did this happen? Why didn't I see the signs? But there was one question that haunted me more than the others. What if Jake can't forgive me? I got up from the couch, my legs stiff from sitting too long, and walked to the kitchen. I needed something to calm my nerves. I opened the fridge and poured myself a glass of water. I stared at my reflection in the kitchen window, but all I saw was a woman who felt completely lost. A woman who had spent her entire life trusting those around her, only to have the very foundation of that trust shattered in an instant. Suddenly I heard a sound. Footsteps. I turned quickly, my heart racing, hoping it was Jake returning home. But it wasn't Jake. It was Matt, his expression grim as he held up his phone. "Mom, we need to talk." "About what?" I asked, my voice shaking. "What else is there to talk about? Isn't the truth already enough?" "Please, just listen," Matt said, his tone serious. He sat down at the kitchen table and I followed him, heart pounding. "We've traced the hospital records. I think I know who the other family is." I froze. "What do you mean? Who are they?" Matt took a deep breath. "It's a couple named the Millers. They live in the same town. We found their contact details. It seems they were the ones who had their baby switched at birth too." I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The Millers. I had never heard of them before, but now their names were forever linked to the unraveling of my entire life. "How do you know it's them?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I checked their records, their pictures. They have a daughter who looks exactly like Jake. I can't explain it, but this is real." I felt a lump form in my throat. Everything I thought I knew about my family, about my grandson, was being turned upside down. How did this happen? Are we going to meet them? I asked, my voice thick with uncertainty. Matt nodded, his face set with determination. We have to. We need to know the truth. And we need to do it before Jake finds out from anyone else. I nodded, trying to summon the strength I had lost somewhere along the way. I had to do this. I owed it to Jake and I owed it to myself. The truth couldn't stay hidden anymore. The next morning, the air felt thick with anticipation. The tension in the house was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. I hadn't slept a wink, my mind consumed with the question of who the Millers were. Who are these strangers that are now part of Jake's story? I couldn't help but wonder if they'd somehow be able to replace me in his life. Matt had been on the phone all morning making arrangements to meet with them. I was glad he was taking charge, but I wasn't sure I could handle facing them. My thoughts kept spinning around the one thing I knew for sure. I had to be there for Jake. No matter what, I had to stand by him. Jake had barely spoken to me since our conversation last night. He hadn't come down for breakfast, and I was starting to worry that he'd made up his mind to shut me out completely. Every second felt like an eternity, and I felt helpless, as if I was watching my own family slip through my fingers. Matt knocked on my door later that afternoon, his expression more serious than ever. Mom's time. The Millers are waiting for us. I took a deep breath and nodded, trying to steady my nerves. All right. Let's do this. We drove in silence, the weight of the situation hanging between us. As we neared the address Matt had found, I noticed the area was unfamiliar. Quiet suburban streets, neatly manicured lawns. This family lived a world away from the chaos that had now become my life. We pulled up in front of a modest but well-kept home. It was the kind of place where neighbors would wave to each other as they passed. I could see the faint silhouette of a woman through the window, and my heart began to race. Was this it? Was this where my whole world would change forever? Matt got out of the car first, and I followed behind him, my legs heavy with uncertainty. As I walked toward the front door, I noticed that the woman in the window was watching us. She had a look of apprehension on her face, as if she too were bracing for what was about to happen. Matt rang the doorbell, and the woman opened the door a moment later. She was older than I expected, maybe in her late 40s, dressed casually in a pair of jeans and a blouse. But what caught me off guard was the look in her eyes. It wasn't just curiosity. There was pain there too. A shared pain, I realized, one that came from the same place I had been living for the past 24 hours. You must be Matt, she said, offering a hesitant smile. I'm Rachel Miller. Please come in. Matt shook her hand, his voice warm but uncertain. Thank you for agreeing to meet with us. As we entered the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change in ways I couldn't even imagine. Rachel led us into the living room where her husband, a man in his 50s, stood up from the couch. He was tall with a stern but weary expression. His graying hair added a sense of gravity to his already serious demeanor. This is my husband, Greg, Rachel introduced him, her voice quieter now. Greg, this is Matt, and this is his mother, Sarah. I forced a smile and nodded at them both, my hands trembling slightly. The air in the room felt thick, like we were all trying to figure out what the other was thinking without daring to speak it aloud. Rachel motioned for us to sit. I'm sure you have many questions, Rachel said, her voice soft but steady. We do too. But this isn't easy. I looked at her, my heart pounding in my chest. You have a son? A son who looks like Jake? Rachel nodded slowly. Yes, we do. His name is Elijah. He's 18 now. Just like Jake. But he was born on the same day in the same hospital. And he's the one who was switched with your grandson. The words hit me like a physical blow. Elijah. A name I had never heard before, but one that would now forever be tied to the truth. The son of the Millers. The real family that Jake had been born into. My heart clenched. What did this mean for Jake? I could see the sadness in Rachel's eyes. We've always suspected something was wrong. Elijah had some health issues when he was younger, and the doctors couldn't explain them. It was only recently, when we got DNA testing done for some other family reasons, that the truth came out. Elijah's DNA doesn't match ours. He's not our biological child. I could feel the weight of those words settling in my chest. I had always thought Jake was my flesh and blood. And yet here was another family, another child, who had been living with the same grief I had felt upon hearing the truth. How did you find out? Matt asked quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Rachel sighed, sinking into the armchair across from us. It wasn't easy. We've had our suspicions for a long time. But when we finally got the truth, it was like everything fell apart. We've spent the last few months trying to figure out how to tell Elijah. And now we have to tell you. Greg cleared his throat. We've been in touch with the hospital. They've admitted the error. But it doesn't change the fact that both of our sons, Jake and Elijah, grew up without knowing the truth. Rachel turned to look at me, her expression full of empathy. We know this isn't easy. We don't know what to do either. But one thing is clear. Both of our children have the right to know who they really are. The silence in the room was deafening. The Millers were living with the same nightmare I had just begun to confront. But there was one thing I knew for sure. Jake needed to meet them. He needed to understand where he came from, even if it tore his world apart in the process. The day had come. After hours of restless contemplation, countless phone calls, and many tears, Jake was finally ready to meet the Millers. I couldn't help but feel both relieved and terrified. This was the moment I had feared. The moment when everything would either fall apart or slowly start to rebuild. Rachel and Greg had invited us over to their home again, this time with Elijah in tow. My stomach was a knot of anxiety as Matt and I drove the familiar route, but this time, it felt like the beginning of something much bigger than I could have imagined. As we pulled up to the Miller's house, I could see Elijah through the window, standing tall by the front door. He was clearly nervous, just as Jake had been the first time we'd met. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on all of us. The room would be heavy with emotion. The air would crackle with uncertainty, and no one knew what would happen next. I looked over at Jake. He had been so quiet during the ride, his face a mixture of confusion and anger, with a hint of sadness I hadn't noticed before. I reached over and placed my hand on his. He didn't flinch, but he didn't say a word either. Jake, I said softly, trying to break the silence. I know this is hard. But they're not our enemies. They're family. And they're just as confused and hurt as you are. Jake met my gaze for the first time in hours, his eyes filled with raw emotion. Family? He asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. How do you expect me to call them family? I don't even know who I am anymore. I swallowed the lump in my throat, feeling the weight of his words. You're still my grandson, Jake. That will never change. The car came to a stop in front of the Miller's house, and I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. We all got out of the car, and as I stood there, I could feel the cold sweat on my palms. This was the moment where our lives would change forever. Rachel greeted us at the door, her smile warm but tinged with sadness. I'm so glad you could make it, she said, her voice trembling slightly. I nodded, trying to offer a reassuring smile, though I knew it wasn't convincing. Thank you for having us. Behind her, Elijah stood. He was taller than Jake, with the same dark hair and striking eyes. He looked nervous too, shifting on his feet as if he didn't know what to do with himself. Jake, Rachel said gently, this is Elijah. Your biological brother. Jake's eyes widened, and for a moment I thought he might turn around and leave. I could see the emotions battling within him. Confusion, fear, anger, and perhaps even a small trace of hope. Elijah stepped forward hesitantly, offering his hand to Jake. Hey, he said softly, his voice surprisingly gentle. I know this must be really hard for you, but I just want to say that I'm sorry for everything that's happened. I didn't ask for this any more than you did. Jake stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. His eyes flicked between me and Elijah, trying to make sense of everything. And then, in an unexpected move, he took a deep breath and extended his hand. I guess we're both in this mess now, Jake said, his voice rough but sincere. Nice to meet you, Elijah. The room seemed to exhale collectively as the tension lifted, if only slightly. Elijah gave Jake a small, uncertain smile, and they shook hands. I couldn't help but feel a wave of relief wash over me. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was the first step toward healing, a step I had been terrified would never come. We all sat down together in the living room. The atmosphere was still heavy, but there was something lighter in the air now, something that allowed us to begin the slow process of talking and understanding. The Millers shared stories of their son Elijah, of his childhood, his struggles, and the confusion they had felt when they first realized something was wrong. Jake listened intently, but there was still a deep hurt in his eyes. Every time Rachel spoke about Elijah's early years, I could see Jake fighting the desire to ask questions. The questions he had never dared to ask about his own past. I could see the inner turmoil in his expression, the internal battle between wanting to know more and not being sure if he even wanted to hear the answers. After a long silence, Jake finally spoke. I don't know what to think. I've spent my entire life thinking I was someone I'm not. I don't even know who to trust anymore. Greg, who had been quiet until then, spoke up. I get it, Jake. I really do. This is hard for all of us. But the one thing I know for sure is that none of us asked for this. None of us wanted this. But we're here now. And we have a chance to make something good come out of this mess. I could feel the tension in the room as Jake absorbed Greg's words. Slowly, he nodded as if the weight of the situation was finally beginning to settle in. You're right, Jake said, his voice quiet but firm. I don't know what the future holds, but I know that I have to move forward. I can't keep living in the past. I exhaled the breath I didn't realize I was holding. It wasn't a solution, but it was a breakthrough. Maybe Jake wasn't as lost as I thought. Elijah smiled, a soft, understanding look in his eyes. We don't have to figure it all out today. But maybe we can start with just being there for each other. No matter what happens, we're family. And that means something. I watched as Jake looked at Elijah, a tentative but genuine smile tugging at his lips. Yeah, Jake said, his voice softer now. We'll figure this out, together. The days following the meeting with the Millers were a blur. Jake had become more distant again, retreating into himself after the awkwardness of that first encounter. I understood, of course. He needed time. We all did. But the silence in the house was deafening. I'd never seen him like this before. His usual warmth, the playful banter we shared, all seemed to have been swallowed by a heavy fog of confusion and unresolved questions. Matt was supportive, of course. He kept trying to convince me that this would eventually settle, that the family dynamics would shift in time. But I could see the doubt in his eyes too. It wasn't just the tension between Jake and me, it was the unknown. The truth was still out there, somewhere buried under all the layers of history that had suddenly come undone. I spent my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation in my mind. What did it mean for Jake to have another family? Would he eventually want to be part of it? And what about me? What would I become in his life now? Would I still be his grandma, or was that role now something that belonged to the Millers? I didn't have the answers and I couldn't stop searching for them. But then one afternoon, as I was sifting through old family photos, trying to hold on to the moments that defined Jake's childhood, something caught my eye. A photograph from the day Jake was born. A picture of me holding him in my arms, smiling like nothing in the world could ever go wrong. But there was something strange about it. In the background, there was a nurse I didn't recognize, standing off to the side, her expression unreadable. I squinted at the photo, my heart racing as I realized something I hadn't noticed before. There was a hint of a conversation happening between her and another nurse, one that I couldn't quite make out, but one that seemed too important to ignore. I set the photo down and grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed Matt's number. Matt, I said urgently when he answered, I need you to look at something. It's a photo from the day Jake was born. I think there's something in the background that might give us more information. He sounded concerned. What is it, Mom? There's a nurse in the photo, Matt. I don't recognize her, but it looks like she's talking to another nurse. Do you think they could know something about what happened? I could hear him pause on the other end, probably processing what I was saying. Okay, I'll look into it. Let's see if we can find out who she is. I hung up, feeling a flicker of hope for the first time in days. Maybe this was the break we needed. Maybe there was something we had missed, some piece of the puzzle that would make everything make sense again. As Matt went to work on finding the identity of the nurse, I did what I had been avoiding. I sat down and wrote Jake a letter. He hadn't been speaking to me much. He was distant, withdrawn, and I couldn't help but feel that he was carrying a weight I couldn't ease. The truth had broken him and I wasn't sure how to put the pieces back together. The letter was my attempt to reach out. To tell him that no matter what happened, he would always be my grandson. That this mistake, the hospital's mistake, could never erase the love I had for him. That love was real. And that, no matter the outcome, I would be there for him just as I always had been. It wasn't much, but I hoped it would be enough to show him that I was still here. That we could still fight this together. A few days later, Matt called me. Mom, I found her. The nurse in the photo. Her name is Nurse Williams and she's still working at the hospital. I spoke with some people who knew her and it seems she was one of the nurses on duty the day Jake and Elijah were born. I felt a wave of nausea sweep over me. Could this be the key to everything? Was it possible that Nurse Williams knew the truth all along? Or had the hospital simply covered up a mistake that was too big to acknowledge? We need to speak with her, Matt continued. We need to find out what happened. I agreed without hesitation. There was no more room for fear. The truth was out there and I would not rest until I had it. The following day Matt and I arrived at the hospital. It felt surreal, like I was walking through a dream, unsure of whether I would wake up from this nightmare. We walked into the same sterile, brightly lit halls where Jake had been born, and I felt an odd mix of nostalgia and dread. The memories of the day Jake came into the world seemed so clear now, yet the truth had shattered them into pieces. Nurse Williams wasn't hard to find. She was still working at the same desk in the hospital's reception area. She looked up as we approached, and for a moment her eyes flickered with something that could have been recognition or guilt. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice neutral, though there was a tightness to it. I took a deep breath, the weight of everything pressing down on me. "We need to talk about something important. About the babies that were switched. You were there that day, weren't you?" Her face went pale. She looked around quickly as if making sure no one else was listening. Then she nodded, her voice dropping to a whisper. I shouldn't be talking about this. But yes, I was the one who checked on the babies that day. And Her words faltered and she glanced around again, clearly conflicted. He was scared. I could see that now. "What happened?" Matt pressed, his voice firm but not unkind. "We need to know the truth." Nurse Williams took a shaky breath, her hands clenched together. "The babies, there was an error. A mix-up, and it wasn't noticed until after the babies were taken away from the nursery. I wasn't supposed to say anything. The hospital swept it under the rug. But I know what happened. Jake, your grandson, wasn't supposed to go home with you. The other baby, Elijah, he was switched. They were placed in the wrong cribs." I felt the world tilt beneath me as the truth finally came crashing down, louder than ever. The weight of it all made it hard to breathe. This was real. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a cover-up. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked, my voice shaking with frustration and sorrow. "Why did you let this happen?" Her eyes filled with tears and she wiped them quickly. "I was just a nurse. I didn't have the power to stop it. But I've regretted it every day. And I had to tell you. You deserve to know." I could hardly breathe as Nurse Williams finished her confession. My mind raced, trying to piece together the shattered fragments of my life. The truth that had been hidden for 18 years was finally laid bare before me, and yet it felt like everything had only become more complicated. Matt's grip tightened on my arm as if trying to steady me. I turned to him, trying to process everything I had just heard, but the words seemed to blur together. "Are you telling me that the hospital knew about this mix-up and covered it up?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, still struggling to fully comprehend. Nurse Williams nodded slowly, her eyes downcast, clearly ashamed. "Yes. It was a mistake, but they handled it the wrong way. They told me to stay quiet. They said it would cause too much trouble, too much pain. But I couldn't live with it anymore. Not knowing what happened to you, to your family." I swallowed hard, trying to maintain my composure. How could they have done this? How could they have let this happen to me? To Jake? To Elijah? The betrayal felt like a physical weight pressing down on my chest. "Did anyone else know?" Matt asked, his voice steady but filled with the same underlying anger I felt. "Who else was involved in the cover-up?" Nurse Williams hesitated for a moment before answering. "There were a few others, but they were all senior staff. The doctors, the administrators. They made sure it never came to light. They told me not to get involved." Her admission felt like a punch to the gut. So many people had known the truth, but I had been kept in the dark. My family, my beloved grandson, we had been living a lie for so long. I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me and I struggled to keep it in check. "So what do we do now?" I demanded, my voice shaking with frustration. "What happens next?" Nurse Williams looked at me with a mixture of guilt and regret. "I don't know. I've tried to make amends by telling you the truth. But you have to decide what you want to do with it. You can choose to move forward or you can confront the hospital. You have the right to expose this." Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. For a moment I was paralyzed with indecision. Should we go public with this? Could we really bring the hospital to justice after all this time? Would it hurt Jake even more? But the question that gnawed at me, that tore at my insides, was this: how could we go forward from here? The drive home was quiet. I could feel the tension building between Matt and me, the weight of everything pressing down on us. Neither of us knew what to say. Neither of us had the answers. When we got back to the house, I found Jake sitting on the couch staring at his phone. He didn't even look up when we walked in. His silence was deafening, a reminder that the distance between us was growing. Matt and I exchanged a look before he went up to Jake. I stayed behind, unsure of how to even begin addressing the elephant in the room. How could I fix this? Matt came back down a few minutes later, his face somber. He wants to know everything, Mom. He's ready to hear the full truth. I nodded slowly, my throat tight. He wants the truth. But how much truth could I give him? What would it do to him to know that his entire life had been based on a mistake? Would it be too much to bear? Would it shatter the fragile bond we had? That night we sat down as a family. Jake was sitting across from me, his face blank. He didn't speak as I slowly recounted everything Nurse Williams had told us. I watched his expression shift, watched the sadness creep into his eyes as the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. I've been living someone else's life. Jake's voice cracked, the hurt in his words palpable. How is that possible? How could this happen to me? I don't know, Jake, I replied softly, tears welling up in my eyes. I don't have the answers. I just know that I love you and nothing will ever change that. You've always been my grandson. I've always seen you as my own. Jake's eyes met mine, but they were filled with pain and confusion. But what if I'm not yours? What if I don't belong here? Who am I, Grandma? His question hit me like a slap to the face. Who am I? That was the question I had been asking myself since this nightmare began. What was my role in his life now? Could we ever go back to the way things were? We'll figure this out, Jake, Matt said, his voice low but filled with determination. But we need to do this together. You're not alone in this. Whatever happens next, we face it as a family. I reached for Jake's hand, squeezing it gently. You are my family. Nothing can change that. Not a piece of paper. Not a DNA test. You're still the boy I raised, and I'm still the woman who will always love you. Jake looked down at his hand, the one I was holding, and for a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. But it was quickly replaced by uncertainty, the doubt that had settled in his heart. I just don't know how to move forward, Grandma, Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. I don't know who I am anymore. Tears filled my eyes as I realized how much pain Jake was in. I had spent 18 years loving him, raising him, and in one moment, that love seemed to have been called into question. His identity, everything he thought he knew, was now in turmoil. But I refused to give up on him. I wouldn't let this tear us apart. We don't have to have all the answers right now, Jake, I said softly. We'll take it one step at a time. We'll figure this out together. The days following that conversation were filled with tension and silence. Jake spent most of his time in his room and I could hear him crying late into the night. The weight of the situation was breaking him and I could feel myself slipping further away from him. But then one morning I found a note on the kitchen counter. It was from Jake. Grandma, I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. Can we talk? I wiped away the tears that had already started to fall. This was a step, a small one but a step nonetheless. Jake was still holding on. He was still trying to find his way back to me. The note was simple, yet it felt like the most profound thing Jake had said to me in days. He wanted to try. That was all I needed to know. I wiped my eyes, feeling a sense of relief that I hadn't felt in a long time. For the first time since the truth came to light, I felt like we were on the verge of something. Maybe not a solution, but at least a glimmer of hope. I walked upstairs to Jake's room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't want to rush him, but I knew this was the moment we needed to face together. I knocked gently on his door. Jake. I called softly. There was a long silence before I heard his quiet voice. Come in. I opened the door slowly, stepping into the room. Jake was sitting on his bed, his eyes red from crying, but there was something different about him now, less guarded, less angry. He looked at me with a mixture of uncertainty and longing. I'm sorry, Grandma, he said before I could even speak. I shouldn't have shut you out. I don't know how to process all of this. It's just so much. I sat down beside him, my heart aching. Jake, you don't have to apologize. This isn't your fault. You've been through more than anyone should ever have to go through. But we can work through it, okay? You're still my grandson and nothing will change that. He nodded, but his eyes were still filled with confusion. I know. It's just hard to accept. I don't know who I am anymore. I don't know where I fit in. I've always been Jake Connors. I've always been your grandson. And now everything's upside down. I reached over and placed my hand on his, squeezing it gently. You're still Jake. You're still the boy I raised. The DNA doesn't change the love I have for you, and it doesn't change the bond we share. But we'll find a way to understand this. Together. Whatever happens next, we do it side by side. For a long moment there was silence between us. I could feel the weight of his thoughts, the storm raging inside of him. He was trying to piece together a life that had just been torn apart. And I couldn't pretend that it was easy for him, or for me. But I couldn't let go of the hope that we could rebuild. I know this is a lot, Jake. And I know you're confused and angry. But you're not alone in this. I'm right here and I always will be. We'll get through it. One step at a time, I said softly, my voice steady even though I was just as lost as he was. Jake took a deep breath and slowly nodded, his expression softening. Thanks, Grandma. I don't know what the future holds, but I think I need to try. I need to figure out who I am now. I smiled gently, brushing a strand of his hair from his forehead. That's all anyone can do, sweetheart. We just need to keep moving forward. In the days that followed, things began to shift, slowly but surely. Jake and I started talking more openly, even about the things that were hard to face. He didn't speak to the Millers directly yet, but I could see a small change in him. The walls he'd built up between us were starting to come down. But it wasn't easy. There were days when the silence was unbearable, when I could feel Jake slipping back into the sadness he tried to hide. And there were moments when I felt just as lost as he did, unsure of how to be the grandmother he once needed, unsure of how to guide him through this storm. It was on one of those days that Matt came to me with new news. Mom, I've been thinking, he began, pacing in the living room. We need to talk to the Millers again. Not just about the past, but about Jake's future. We need to decide what's best for him moving forward. I looked up from my knitting, surprised by the sudden urgency in Matt's voice. What do you mean? What's best for him? I've been reading up on this kind of situation, he said, sitting down across from me. And it's clear we need to consider everything. Jake needs closure with the Millers. He needs to know where he belongs, even if it's complicated. I nodded slowly, thinking it through. You're right. I can't pretend everything's going to be okay without addressing the elephant in the room. Jake needs to face this just like we all do. But it's hard for him. It's hard for me. Matt gave me a sympathetic look. I know. But this isn't about just moving on. It's about understanding who we are, where we come from, and how we fit into this world. Jake can't just carry this burden alone. I sat back in my chair, considering his words. Could this really be the solution? Was I ready to let Jake go down that path? To face the truth about his biological family and what that meant for him? Before I could answer, my phone rang. It was Rachel Miller. My heart skipped a beat as I answered the call. Sarah, Rachel said, her voice filled with urgency. I think it's time we sit down with Jake. He needs to hear from us, and I think we need to talk about what happens next. Can we meet? I took a deep breath, my heart pounding. This was it. The moment of reckoning had arrived. It was time to face the Millers, to bring everything into the open. This was Jake's chance to understand where he came from and to finally put the pieces of his life together. Of course, I replied, my voice steady. Let's meet. Let's talk. The meeting was set for the following weekend, and I could already feel the tension building. The thought of Jake confronting the Millers, and Elijah, again made my stomach twist. But I also knew this was something Jake needed to do. It was time for him to understand who he truly was and where he belonged. As the day approached, I could feel a sense of unease settling in. What if Jake couldn't handle the truth? What if the Millers' presence only made things harder for him? Could this meeting really heal the wounds, or would it make everything worse? But there was no turning back now. This was the next step in our journey. We had to face it together, no matter how hard it was. The day of the meeting arrived, and I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me with every passing minute. The house felt colder, the air heavier. Jake had barely said a word since we made the decision to meet with the Millers. I could see the storm brewing inside him. Anger, confusion, fear, and somewhere beneath it all, a fragile thread of hope. He was holding on to something, though I couldn't quite tell what it was. Matt, as always, remained the steady one. He kept talking about taking things one step at a time, but I could tell he was nervous too. This was a family meeting unlike any other. It was a meeting that could either start the healing process or tear us all further apart. I couldn't stop thinking about what Jake's reaction would be. Would he be able to look at the Millers and see them as part of his life now? Or would their very presence remind him of the lie that had been thrust upon him? I wasn't sure, but I had to try. Jake was in his room, sitting on the edge of his bed, staring out of the window. The room felt so quiet, the only sound the faint rustling of the leaves outside. I knew he was dreading this as much as I was. It was hard to imagine that a simple meeting could change everything, but I knew it could. I knocked softly on his door before entering. "Jake," I said quietly, my voice trembling slightly. He turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. For a moment neither of us said anything. The silence between us felt heavy, laden with the words neither of us wanted to say. "I'm scared, Grandma," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if I can do this. I don't know if I can face them." I moved to sit beside him, my hand resting gently on his shoulder. "Jake, I know it's scary. But you don't have to do this alone. We're doing this together. No matter what happens, you're still my grandson. That hasn't changed." He let out a long sigh, the weight of it all visibly pressing down on him. "But what if I can't accept it? What if I don't want to know them? What if I can't forgive them for what they did?" I could see the pain in his eyes, the conflict that had been tearing him apart for weeks. And I knew that this meeting, this moment, was his chance to either move forward or let the past consume him. But even as the words left his mouth, I knew there was more than just the Millers to face. It wasn't just about accepting them. It was about accepting himself. "Jake," I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady, "forgiveness doesn't mean you forget. It means you find a way to let go of the anger. It means you don't let the past decide your future. And right now the most important thing is that you don't lose yourself in all of this. You don't have to have all the answers today. You just have to take it one step at a time." He nodded slowly, the uncertainty still written all over his face, but something in his eyes softened. Maybe he was ready for the next step. Maybe he wasn't. But we were about to find out. The drive to the Miller's house was unbearable. The tension in the car was thick, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Jake sat beside me, his hands folded in his lap, his gaze focused on the road ahead. I could tell he was dreading this, but there was no turning back now. When we arrived at the Miller's house, I could see Rachel and Greg standing by the door waiting for us. Rachel's face was a mix of apprehension and something else I couldn't quite read. Perhaps hope or perhaps fear that this would all fall apart. Matt led the way as we stepped out of the car, and I could feel Jake stiffen beside me. He was clearly struggling with everything he had been told, everything he had learned about his past. But he had come this far. He was here. And that, in itself, was a victory. "Jake," Rachel said softly, her voice full of emotion. "I know this isn't easy, but I want you to know, we didn't ask for any of this. But we're here now and we want to make this right." Jake didn't say anything immediately. He just looked at her, his expression unreadable, and then his eyes flicked over to Elijah, who was standing quietly beside his parents. Elijah looked just as nervous, just as unsure, but he stepped forward. "Hey," Elijah said, his voice gentle. "I know this is all a lot. But I want you to know I don't blame you. I'm not angry. I can't even imagine what you're feeling. But I think we can find a way through this." Jake's gaze softened just a little. He didn't speak, but he nodded slowly. It was the smallest of gestures, but it was something. It was a crack in the walls he had built around himself. I could feel the weight of this moment. It wasn't just about meeting the Millers. It was about Jake finding a way to accept what had happened and begin the painful process of healing. We all sat down in the living room, the silence stretching between us. Rachel began to speak, her voice shaking slightly. "Jake, I know this is a lot to take in. But we want to be part of your life. We want you to be part of ours. I don't know how this is going to work, but I do know that we can't let the past control us. We need to move forward." Jake's eyes flickered to mine for just a moment. I could see the confusion and the pain still there, but there was something else. Something that hinted at the possibility of healing. Of forgiveness. "I don't know if I can forgive anyone right now," Jake said finally, his voice soft but firm. "I don't know how to just forget all of this. But I think I can try. I think I can try to figure out who I am now. And I think I can try to let you be part of my life." Rachel's eyes filled with tears and she reached for Jake's hand, her grip tight. "Thank you," she whispered. Thank you for being willing to try. That evening as we drove back home, there was a silence that felt different. It wasn't heavy or suffocating. It was a quiet kind of peace, a fragile peace that came with knowing that the worst part was over. Jake didn't speak much, but his hand was still resting on the seat next to me. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. It meant that, despite everything, he hadn't given up on us. The days after the meeting with the Millers felt like a delicate balance, each moment teetering between uncertainty and a cautious hope. I could feel Jake's transformation, however small it was. He was no longer angry, not in the way he had been when he first learned the truth. But the wound was still there, raw and open, and it would take time to heal. We spent the next week in an uneasy calm. Jake had started to spend more time with Elijah and the Millers, but it was clear that he was still grappling with his identity. Every conversation, every encounter, was laced with a hint of discomfort, like they were walking on eggshells around him. But slowly, those moments of awkwardness began to fade, replaced by quiet understanding. Jake wasn't ready to call Elijah brother yet, but there were subtle changes. They were starting to find common ground, just as Jake and I were trying to rebuild the trust we had once shared. One evening, Jake sat down with me at the kitchen table. He had been quieter than usual that day, lost in thought. I could see the conflict still waging inside him, but he was beginning to open up more, letting the walls come down piece by piece. "Grandma," Jake began, his voice steady but with an edge of uncertainty. "I've been thinking about everything. About the Millers. About who I am now." I nodded, encouraging him to continue, though I couldn't help but feel a flutter of anxiety. What would he say? "I don't know if I'll ever be okay with everything," Jake continued, his voice soft but resolute. "But I think I'm ready to try. To find out who I really am. To figure out where I belong, even if it means accepting the Millers as part of my life." My heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. He was trying. He was finding his way forward. "I'm so proud of you, Jake," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. But I'm here for you every step of the way. You're still my grandson. You always will be. Nothing can change that." Jake looked at me, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "I know, Grandma. I know. And I'm starting to realize that maybe that's enough for now. Maybe I don't need to figure everything out at once." The weight that had been pressing on my chest for weeks seemed to lift, if only slightly. I could see the first flicker of peace in his eyes. It wasn't perfect and it wasn't going to be easy, but we were on the right path. The next few months were filled with small victories. Jake spent more time with Elijah, and the Millers welcomed him into their lives with open arms. They didn't push him, didn't try to force a relationship. They simply gave him space and time to process everything in his own way. They understood that forgiveness couldn't be rushed. It had to come on its own terms. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jake came to me with a look of determination in his eyes. He had grown up so much in the past few months. His face was no longer clouded with confusion or anger. There was clarity in his gaze now, a newfound strength. "Grandma," he said, his voice quiet but full of conviction, "I think I'm ready to call them my family. It doesn't mean it's all fixed. It doesn't mean everything's perfect. But I'm ready to accept them. And I'm ready to accept myself." I felt a lump rise in my throat as I looked at him. He had come so far and I was so proud of him. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment he began to truly heal. "That's all anyone can ask for, Jake," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "I'm so proud of you. So proud of how far you've come." He smiled, and for the first time in months, I saw a glimpse of the boy I had raised. He wasn't just my grandson anymore. He was his own person, finding his place in the world one step at a time. The next time we met with the Millers, it was different. There was no tension, no awkwardness. Jake was still processing everything, but he was open to the idea of building a relationship with them. The truth had been painful, but it had brought us closer in ways I hadn't anticipated. "We're family," Rachel said, her eyes glistening with emotion. "And family doesn't just mean DNA. It means love. It means being there for each other no matter what." Jake nodded, his voice steady. "I'm still trying to figure out who I am, but I know I want to be part of this. Part of your family." Greg smiled warmly, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. "We're glad to have you, Jake. Take your time, but know that we're here and we'll always be here." The meeting was a turning point for Jake. For the first time he truly began to embrace the idea of the Millers as part of his life. It wasn't a perfect resolution. It wasn't a quick fix. But it was real. And sometimes real was enough. The following months were full of growth and change. Jake's relationship with the Millers continued to blossom, though it was slow and steady. He began to call them his family, though there were moments when he still felt torn. But with time the love and understanding grew. He finally found peace within himself, and I could see the boy I had raised, his heart full of love and compassion, emerging again. As for me, I found my place in this new family dynamic as well. I was still Jake's grandma, and that wasn't something that could ever be taken away. The love I had for him was unchanged, and I knew we would face whatever came next together no matter what. One quiet evening, as we sat around the dinner table, Jake raised his glass and looked around at the people who now made up his family, both biological and chosen. To family, he said, his voice filled with a quiet but strong conviction. No matter how it came to be, we're here, and that's what matters. I smiled, tears welling in my eyes as I raised my glass to him. To family, I echoed. And for the first time in a long while, I felt that familiar warmth spread through me. The past was behind us and the future was ours to shape.